So, do any of you recognize or know what this is? I'm Eddie McRae with Riverman Fishing in NuCanoe, and this is the NuCanoe Hi-Lo seat base. No, it's not a product that's available now. It was actually available several years ago on the Pursuit model only. It was a great, super design, and then due to some patent issues, NuCanoe decided to discontinue it and stop production, take it off the market. As I said, it was for the Pursuit only, but hey, you know what that means now? It fits the Flint as well. So, if you're one of the lucky people that already has one of these, you're probably the envy of a lot of NuCanoe owners. If you're fortunate enough to be able to get your hands on one, I would definitely say jump on it. At any rate, the cool feature about this is the fact that it was adjustable in the high and low positions, which I just showed you. The low position taking your center of gravity forward when you needed to be seated lower. The higher position putting your center of gravity a little more towards the rear of the boat. Perfect scenario for river fishing. And I absolutely love this base. But the seat itself may have been lacking. So in this video today, I'm going to show you a quick upgrade to upgrade this seat base to accept all of our new seating systems, including the Pinnacle and the Fusion, and also including the swivel and the quick release bracket. So stay tuned, we'll get started. Okay, to begin with, a little background. This seat originally came as aluminum frame with a mesh seat cloth that was a lace-on fit. Now, as you can tell, I've already removed the mesh cloth and the lacing, and I removed the rear seat frame. So basically in this upgrade, what we're going to do is replace this aluminum frame with two round tube steel runners on either side, and then we're going to come in and install two square tube cross members that will accept our new seating bolt patterns. The seat bolt pattern that's the same as the swivel pattern, that's the same as the quick detached bracket pattern. This project, the way I'm going to undertake it, I'm going to be using, as I said, tube steel, round tube and square tube. There are any number of ways you could approach this with the same principle. You could actually do it with aluminum tubing, or if you don't have access to welding equipment, because this will require some minor elementary welding, I will go over another alternative method later on in the video. I chose to go steel tubing because my big MIG welder, in order to weld aluminum, I have to convert it to spool gun, and for a job this small, it's just really not worth the effort. And going with thin wall steel tubing will only add maybe a couple of pounds at best. So as I said, what I'm going to do is remove this seat frame, replace what we have here with two round tube steel side runners, one on each side, and then I'll come back and actually coat cut with a 1-inch hole saw two square tube cross members. Also, one other thing, this is 1-inch diameter, so we're going to be using 1-inch round tube and 1-inch square tube. So the first thing I'm going to do then is go ahead, if you have one of these Hi-Lo seat bases, you already know what I'm talking about, but each of these collars here has two, I believe they're 1032 screws with lock nuts. So we'll have to remove those, as well as the rear bolt, as well as these two release pins, and then we'll do the same back here, and these tubing collars will open up and we'll be able to remove that and get started. So that's going to be our first step, is removing the old existing frame. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what we're looking at here. Each of these collars that holds the round tube in place, there are 4 of these collars. Each of them has 2 stainless screws with lock nuts that run through these locations, and then 1 bolt here. So I've already removed all of the stainless screws all the way around, and if you remove this bolt, then this collar will open up and you're free to remove the tubing. Okay, so now I've got the seat frame and the mount collars completely removed from the base, as you can see here. Before I did that, I went ahead and took some measurements, so I'm going to go over that real quick. We're going to want each of our round tube side frame reinforcements. They're going to be 13.5 inches. And for our square tube cross members that we're going to tie those 2 side frame members back together with, we're actually going to be coping those so inside cut to inside cut measurement is 19.5 inches and their overall length is 20.5 inches. That's to allow for a 1/2 inch offset on either side. Now, once I make those coping cuts and show you how I'm fitting the square tube to the round tube, you'll completely understand what I'm referring to. But just remember your critical measurements here if you decide to take on a project like this on your own. The round tube side members, 13.5 inches. Square tube cross members, 19.5 inches inside to inside, or 20.5 outside to outside. So what I've got here is the 1 inch round tube and the 1 inch square tube. What I'm using here is roughly 80 thousandths wall thickness. It's thin wall, and the measurement actually, as far as the 1 inch is concerned, is referring to outside diameter. Anyway, it's time for me to go ahead and get these pieces cut. So I'll be using standard chop saw to make these cuts, and then once I'm done making the cuts, I'll go ahead and take the square tubing over to the mill. If you don't, of course, have a mill, you can always use a drill press, and I'll use a 1 inch hole saw to make the coping cuts on each end of the square tubing. So I'm going to go ahead and get that part of it done and be right back. Okay, I just wanted to show you a close-up view of these cuts. Everything's finished. I've made all the coping cuts and the square cuts. So the round tubing is cut to length, the square tubing is coped and cut to length. I've actually gone back and cleaned my cuts up on the grinder and then used a hand file. But I wanted you to be able to see what I was referring to when I was talking about the cope cuts, if you weren't already familiar. And when I refer to inside measurement, this is the inside of your cope cut. So when I refer to that measurement of 19.5, it's inside of cut to inside of cut. And just to give you an idea of how this will fit, that's the purpose of the cope cut right there. So now we can mock assemble the chair or the seat frame back together, and then I'll spot weld these in place before removing the entire assembly again and completing all the welding. Now, one other alternative that I was going to mention here that I had mentioned earlier, if you don't have access to welding equipment, your other solution, you could actually drill each of your side tubes and run a length of threaded rod completely through, and with a lock nut on either end, you could actually sandwich your two side members in together, which would clamp your cross member in place. So if, like I said, if you needed an alternative without welding, a full length threaded rod run through the entire length of the square tubing would accomplish that. Okay, so there's actually one other thing I wanted to touch on before I mock assemble this and get it spot welded in place. And that is the reasons I chose to use the type of tubing that I did. Now, obviously, you could have done this with all aluminum round tubing. You could do this with all steel round tubing, or you can do it the way I chose with round tubing and square tubing. Now, obviously, with the side clamps, the couplings that mount here at these 4 points, you have to use round tube for those. But there is a specific reason that I chose to use square tube for these inner cross members. All right, number one, strength. Number two, it's much easier to index these cope cuts than it would be on round tubing, making sure that your cope cuts are square to each other. Also, it's going to be much easier to index and mark the holes for the seat mount or the quick release bracket or the swivel, whichever you're choosing to use. And as I said, my reasoning for going with steel tubing versus aluminum is I have access to weld aluminum, but it requires a lot more preparation, and it just really wasn't worth converting my welder to do this small of a job. Steel tubing will work just fine. It's not going to really be that much of an excess in weight. It might add an extra 2 pounds at best. But anyway, I'm just trying to give you some options here. And of course there are always options versus what you see me doing on video versus the methods that you may use. Cutting methods, for example, I used a chop saw, but you could use a hacksaw, you could use a bandsaw, any number of methods. Whatever is easiest for you to accomplish the given goal. At any rate, I just wanted to touch on those things before I go any further. And like I said, as far as the welding itself is concerned, if you don't have a welder or you don't have easy access to a welder, you do always have that alternative of using a through threaded rod. Okay, so as you can see, I've got everything mocked back up. But before I go any further, I need to apologize and make a correction real quick about one thing. I realized as I was mocking this up that I used the wrong measurement for these cross members and provided you the wrong measurement earlier in the video. I originally said these were 19.5 inside to inside. They are 19.5 outside measurement, 18.5 inside to inside. So just remember that correction, 18.5 inches inside to inside. One more thing that I forgot to mention earlier during the disassembly of this seat is while you still have the seat frame installed, go ahead, bring it in the upright position, put your lock pins in place, and tighten everything as tight as you can. These adjustments here at the bottom are actually tension adjustable to adjust the amount of raise and lower tension that you have with this seat. So the reason I say go ahead and tighten them down, crank them down as tight as you can, that way you make sure that all 4 upright arms stay in correct alignment and geometry with each other. At any rate, now that I've got this mocked up, my next steps are going to be to spot weld these 2 cross members, and then I'll come back and actually drill the holes that will run through the round tubing. So I'm going to have spot welds at 4 points, maybe 8 points here, and then I'm going to have 8 holes to drill for the 2 screws each that go into each of these collars. So real quick before I go any further, I was just going to give you a close-up view of this assembly with it being mocked up. You'll see that I've actually used a ratchet strap to pull everything tight together and hold it in place. I'm going to spot weld the cross members on either side, and then I'll come back and drill these 2 holes at each of the 4 locations. Okay, so I finished spot welding. I went around and drilled 1/8" pilot holes on both sides of the tubing all the way around. And then now that I'm about to disassemble it again, I'll complete all the welding on the cross member, and I'll actually come back and drill these with a 1/4" through holes. And that's where our screws will go back through when we reassemble it. Okay, well, all the fabrication work is done. I finished up with the welding. I drilled all of the collar holes all the way around at 1/4". And I also had one small scrap left off of the 4-foot section of square tubing, so I welded center support in here. And I went ahead and marked the bolt pattern for the quick release bracket, which incidentally this bolt pattern is the same for the quick release bracket as the swivel, as the seat. They all use the same bolt pattern, and it's 5 3/4" square spacing, so it would look something like that right there. That's actually the template that I made to mark those holes. So 5 3/4, 5 3/4. So about the only thing left to do now is take it into the spray room and get some paint on it. And then once it's dry, I can go ahead and reassemble the seat. Okay, so here's the completed upper frame assembly. It's dry, just fresh out of the paint room. I've also gotten some 1" tubing caps, and they'll just give it that nice finished factory look. Each of those caps will go right here in the end. So the next step is just to go ahead and reassemble it. Okay, so this is it completed. I've already gone ahead and installed the quick release bracket here. Of course, it works in conjunction with our NuCanoe 360 swivel. And just to show you how it works, pull your two front release pins, drops into the low position, back to the high position, lock it in place. I'm not even going to put that other pin in. And set the fusion seat on it. And there we have it. High, low, and back to high. Now, if I found that this height was a little too high, I can actually take about 2 inches of height out of this simply by removing the swivel and the quick release bracket and mounting the seat directly to the cross members. But at any rate, in closing, I'll give you some more close-up views of it. And of course, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. Again, as always, thanks for watching. Tight lines, happy paddling.